The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to go on the mat, a presentation of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. It's brought to you by Rolling Ford in Shell Rock.
Welcome to On the Mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. We have two guests today. Doug is out of the host chair, Scott, which is always sad, but what a way to fill in with our first guest. But also want to make sure that we make mention, if you are looking for reasons that wrestling is strong and alive in Iowa, went to the golf tournament for the LaPorte Union. They have the Knights Kids Wrestling Club, and fantastic job with Bart Maylert and Mike Smith. And it just shows what wrestling can do and the byproduct of a great system. And our first guest knows how that system is supposed to work because he was part of the most successful era in Waterloo West wrestling history. He was a two-time state champion, won state championships in 1963 and 1964, and then he's part of that legendary list of wrestlers who have won Division I NCAA wrestling championships from Waterloo. He's one of the 13. Two-time NCAA champion Dale Anderson, who has recently written a book called A Spartan Journey, Michigan State's 1967 Miracle on the Mat. He was an NCAA champion for that team individually in 1967, then won it again in 1968. Dale, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kyle. Good to be here.
Hey, great to have you on. We talked about the book first and foremost. This is special anytime we have a good book coming out. I've looked through the book and read pieces of it, and it's really a fascinating read because this is such an important part of wrestling history. Michigan State won the NCAA tournament in 1967. Michigan was runner-up, and just to give you a historical perspective, until 2011, it was the only time that a team other than Iowa or Oklahoma had not placed in the top two, so really a special year. Take us through the journey and why you decided this story should be told.
Well, most people have heard of Magic Johnson, and in 2000, Magic Johnson told the NCAA championship team at Michigan State that they probably wouldn't appreciate their national championship for maybe 50 years. Well, this is the 50th year of our national championship, and frankly, I'm just beginning to fully appreciate what we did back in 67. The reason I said it was a miracle was that in 1964, Michigan State finished last in the Big Ten. We got 1 point in the Big Ten tournament. 3 years later, 1967, we are national champions. And another part of the miracle is most of us shouldn't even have ended up at Michigan State, and most of us were at least technically walk-ons. So here we're beating Oklahoma State that has won more national championships than any other program, whether football, basketball, whatever, in history, from what I understand. And Oklahoma State was a dynasty. We couldn't beat them. There's no way we could beat them. And Oklahoma, too, was very strong that year. In fact, Oklahoma was stronger than Oklahoma State that year, so they both were incredibly powerful programs. And somehow we beat them. And I wanted to tell that story, and I couldn't figure out how to tell it. I was trying to get a number of people who are really wrestling historians to tell the story, because I've written a number of law books, but I've never written a nonfiction book per se. And so I couldn't get anybody to write it for us, so I decided to write it for myself and told it more or less as an autobiography, explaining a lot of my history from going from Roland, Iowa to Waterloo and on to Iowa State and then to Michigan State.
On the line with Dale Anderson, two-time NCAA wrestling champion for Michigan State, won titles in 1967 and 1968. The 1967 season is part of his new book, A Spartan Journey, Michigan State's 1967 Miracle on the Mat. And the architect of that program, Grady Penninger, is featured throughout. And a lot of people probably know the names Gable or Myron Roderick or E.C. Gallagher, Jay Robinson, John Smith. But Grady Penninger is one of those figures in our sport that maybe gets left out a little bit. What made him tick? Why was he able to get Michigan State over the top when other teams had failed?
That's a really good question. What Grady did to build the program, as far as I was concerned, was he visited me my junior year. Now, no other college coach, paid any attention to me my junior year, including Harold Nichols at Iowa State or Bill Cole, one of the great wrestlers and coaches in history. Nobody paid any attention to me. Here's Grady Penninger visiting me my junior year and my parents, and the first thing he says when he sits down almost is, Dale, when you graduate from college, your national championship and a dime will buy you a cup of coffee. Well, that's all my mother needed to hear. Grady said, what you really need is a good education, and that's what we offer at Michigan State. And then the coup de grace, he says, I'm offering you a 4-year full ride scholarship. And I was shocked. I had no idea that anybody was ever going to offer me any kind of scholarship, let alone a 4-year full ride scholarship. Well, when somebody does that, and then along comes Doug Blubaugh, who was a world champion, Olympic champion, outstanding wrestler in the world. I had no idea who this guy was, but the second he starts talking, the guy couldn't tell a lie if he had to. I mean, he was just such a sincere, great guy, farmer and Olympic champion, outstanding wrestler in the world. And he won my parents' heart. He didn't exactly win, these guys didn't exactly win my heart automatically, but they certainly won my parents' heart. And in the long run, we just all sort of felt that this was a program to go to, even though, in 1964, my senior year, they took last in the Big Ten.
You were at West Waterloo High School, 2-time state champion there, and you wrestled under another legendary coach, Bob Siddons. Compare those two. Compare and contrast Grady Penninger to Bob Siddons and what made them both successful and made them both ideal coaches for you.
Nobody compares to Bob Siddons.
Okay.
Nobody.
So what separates him?
No one even comes close. Grady, Doug Blubaugh neither of them come close. One thing about high school coaches is they become more like parents, and I think college coaches, except for people like Gable, become more like employers. You're doing a job, and you're getting paid to do that job, so you go on the team to earn your pay. And that's a little bit the way I think I had to look at it as, a college athlete. I absolutely loved wrestling. I was, addicted to it in high school. I wasn't so addicted to it in college. I simply had to make the team in order to get a scholarship ultimately. And, it was just, it was a real tough go, particularly my freshman year. And I write about it in the book, how hard it was, because I transferred from Iowa State to Michigan State mid-year, so I had no scholarship at all. I had to earn my scholarship at Michigan State, even though Grady had offered me a full ride, because there was no way back then that Coach Nichols was going to, allow me to have a scholarship at Michigan State. So
on the line with Dale Anderson, he's one of the 13 Division I NCAA wrestling champions from a Waterloo high school, and the only one to win an NCAA championship outside the state of Iowa. Won NCAA championships for Michigan State in 1967 and 1968. His new book, A Spartan Journey, Michigan State's 1967 Miracle on the Mat, is now available, and people who are interested in talking to you, interacting with you, and interacting with your coach and one of your teammates, Dan Gable and Bob Siddons, have an opportunity to do that this week. On Thursday, you are going to be at the OP on Ridgeway signing books. Tell us what that's going to look like, Dale.
Well, this originally began as a sort of get-together with old friends from my class at West High and some other people who were West High graduates. And then it kind of spread out. And one of the reasons was because the book that I wrote, A Spartan Journey, came in. And so I decided, and I guess a bunch of us kind of decided at the same time, that I would do a book signing at the OP for anyone who wants the book on Thursday night. Coach Gable and Coach Siddons have said that they are going to be there to sign the book also, and I kind of like the idea of keeping it informal and just, enjoying a good time with a lot of old friends there. And so we plan to arrive probably at the OP on Ridgeway at around 5 o'clock and maybe stick around till 6:30, 7:30 or so.
Okay, so anyone can attend if they want to meet you guys and interact. This is open to everyone, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Are you excited about the book? Are you excited about the product and what people are going to learn out of this new book?
This book took 10 drafts, and a lot of people helped me to edit it. And when it came in, the other day, I was really excited to see it. I was surprised at, I think, for me, how good it looked, just how well formatted it was, and I had a lot of help from my editor on that part, and just I feel real good about the book and feel that it has a little piece for everybody. I swear I've had maybe 10 to 20 people read it, and each of them brought out a different part of the book that they liked the best. So I have different sections in the book kind of discussing. I have one section discussing my history, sort of as an autobiography. And then I have another section about Iowa sports, and then another section about Michigan State sports. And then I have one section that discusses nothing but the 1967 NCAA tournament, and another section that discusses exactly in detail why we won and why nobody else did, whether it was Iowa State or the Oklahoma schools. So there's just, I think, depending upon what you like, like my editor said specifically, she liked the parts where it was storytelling, my growing up and, why I became a wrestler rather than a basketball player. My brother was on some really great basketball teams at Roland, Iowa, that actually beat West High in the state tournament. So, those were kind of fun things to write about, too. So it has a lot of different details that I think, I think a lot of people will like. Some people may not. It may not be a book for everybody. Among the elements that fascinated me was that you actually say in the book that you don't have a great memory and sometimes recall is hard. How did you meld that together where you're saying, hey, I don't have a good memory, and being able to get some of the facts right? I tried every way I could to document. In other words, I'd go back to newspaper articles or other types of documentation. And then what I also would try to do is to make absolutely certain with fellow team members that my facts were right. I would say, do you remember this specifically? Do you remember this fact? And I actually, this may be a little bit ironic for me to say to you, I had a part in there on Gable, and I actually asked Dan, can I send you these parts that relate directly to you? But I don't think he was interested actually in reviewing it or, to the extent of saying, yes, this is what happened or this didn't happen. He did write a foreword for the book, which I really appreciated, and he said some very nice things about me, and I appreciated that too. So I tried my best. After 50 years, nobody remembers perfectly, and someone will come up and probably say this or that didn't happen exactly this or that way. But I just tried my best, and where I was basically using my own memory, I actually said that. I said, this is the way I remember it happening, and that's the best I can do.
And the match that a lot of people want to talk about, and you go into detail about, 1967 Midlands, you wrestled Dan Gable in the finals of the Midlands tournament. It goes into overtime. Of course, you won the state championship in 1964 along with Dan. You were a senior. He was a sophomore. Just briefly, what does that match mean to you, and why does it resonate to so many people?
I can't speak for other people, in terms of resonating for them. I was told by Dale Carr, who was the weight above me, that he moved to California, and he said that there was a coach out there, a high school coach, who actually saw the match and said it was the best match he had ever seen, which, I was really flattered about because I didn't really feel, and I've heard Dan say stuff about this, and I agree with him, I don't think either of us wrestled our best match. If I had it to do over again, I would have loved to have wrestled Dan in the wrestling room with Bob Siddons refereeing, during the Christmas break. If I'd have thought of it, I'd have said that, because I think we would have both had fun doing that. But Dan has told me and told others that before the match he was scared, and I was kind of glad of it because of different factors that were involved. He has said that, and I was in high school 5 weights above him, and I was 2 years older. And if anybody can relate to that, all they got to do is think back at high school. If they remember anybody 5 weights heavier than they were that was 2 years older, you would probably say that's a good reason why you might feel mildly intimidated, even if you've never lost a match. I hadn't, at the time that I wrestled Dan, I hadn't lost a match in a couple of years. I was a returning national champion. Dan hadn't yet won a national championship. He was a sophomore, and freshmen couldn't wrestle in a national tournament. So it's set up really as one of the great matches of the year.
Sure was.
I slowed the match down a little bit for a lot of different reasons, and he ended up beating me in overtime, and that's the best I can say. He won the match, and it was I thought it would be a lot better match in the national finals, because at that moment I began to think, this is all I'm going to wrestle for, is just wrestling Dan in the national finals. But our old coach Siddons called Dan up and asked him to go down a weight, and so he did. Dan acquiesced and went down a weight, and so we both won the national championship that year because of that. Otherwise, we would have been wrestling in the national finals that year.
Dale, we are out of time, but make sure that you check out the new book, A Spartan Journey, Michigan State's 1967 Miracle on the Mat, and be sure to visit the OP on Ridgeway to visit 3 wrestling icons. Dale Anderson, Dan Gable, and Bob Siddons will all be there at 5 o'clock on Thursday, September 29th. Thank you for joining us, Dale. Look forward to seeing you this week.
You can get the book at 67spartanbook.com.
Okay, 67spartanbook.com, and you get a chance to see the author this week on Thursday. Thanks for joining us, Dale.
Thank you. Bye, Kyle.
All right, we'll see you. Up next, we have 2-time NCAA wrestling champion from Minnesota, Damion Hahn, next on the mat, 1650 The Fan.
1650 The Fan, KCNZ.
We are back on the mat, 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. We had a 2-time NCAA champion from Michigan State on In our first segment, we have another two-time NCAA champion from another Big Ten school, NCAA champion for Minnesota in 2003 and 2004. He's a four-time All-American, one of the greatest wrestlers in high school history. Now he's a assistant coach at Cornell University. His name is Damion Hahn. He's with us. How are you, Damion?
I'm doing well, Kyle. How are you?
Great. And when I think of Cornell, I think of a team that is always in the hunt for an NCAA championship, and you're a big part of that. Gabe Dean is a guy that historically has been your guy. This is a guy that he has always said you guys have this great relationship. What goes into that? Why do you guys have such a special bond that transcends just wrestling?
Well, I think that personalities attract one another, and from the day we recruited Gabe, we kind of just hit it off, and we have a lot of the same visions. Going into his future in the sport, and he's one of the type. He's the type of kid that he's a sponge, and he listens, he takes it in, and he does. So we've built a relationship over the past 5 years that it goes above and beyond wrestling. When he comes from a great family, great structure. And when he came to Cornell, not that went away, but he needed something. He needed that, those parents, and and that's what I think we do exceptionally well here. Is these are our kids, and we look after them as if they were our own. So that's kind of how me and Gabe kind of just we bonded, and I'm there for him, and he's there for me, and it's a learning process, every day. So it's we understand, what goes into the college atmosphere, the academics, athletics, and we have just had a great relationship, and it'll continue, for a long time.
What was it like when he won his first NCAA championship in 2015, and you got to be a part of that and see how excited he was? Can you remember what it was like to feel that joy?
Well, I competed up until 2008, and when it was a hard decision to say, okay, I'm done, I'm going to retire, and it was a sad day, but also a very happy day, because now I could devote and jump in full time to my guys. And the second I did that, I get more, looking back now, I get more enjoyment out of seeing my guys succeed in life than I ever did myself on the mat. So when you have a guy like Gabe Dean coming in, and I remember talking to him on the phone after the NCAA tournament when he was sitting in the stands, his gray shirt year, and he called me up, and he goes, Coach, listen, I just want to be an All-American next year. And I said, Gabe, listen, I know what you want to do. Let's take it slow. This is only April. And I said, we have all summer, we have the whole season, and so we're going to work towards that goal. And he ended up having a great freshman year, taking third at the national tournament. And then that was just the catalyst to what, we have seen him do. And when he made it to the finals his sophomore year, and ends up winning, beating a guy that he has seen multiple times throughout the year, it was the icing on the cake to a phenomenal season for him. And I couldn't have been more happy to be a part of that journey with him. He's a special kid, and our relationship grows. And there are no words that I can say that could describe the emotions that he was feeling, that I was feeling for him. And it was a great time for us.
Your journey started with thinking that wrestling was professional wrestling, isn't that right? I mean, it's pretty fascinating to think here you are in this situation, but you got into it because you thought it was pro wrestling.
Yeah, that's I've told this story a number of times, and it's funny because there was, the media coverage for, when I was coming through, there was none of this. You might see a message board or the newspaper. That's how we got our information. I remember, sitting with my high school coach, and we'd pull up the newspaper after the weekend, and we'd see box scores, and that's how we kind of knew who won and who lost. And so when I was growing up, there was none of this. And I remember in elementary school, I was second grade, and the gym teacher handed out a flyer, and it said recreational wrestling. And I was pumped. I brought it home to my parents, and I told them, I was like, I got to do this. This is, I've seen it on TV. I'm going to jump off the top ropes. I'm going to hit a guy with a chair. And I remember my mom and dad, they were like, listen, this is not that kind of wrestling. And I told them, I said, I don't care. I'm going to kick. I'm going to punch. And they had to reiterate it, not that kind of wrestling. So I remember the first night my mom took me, it was at Jackson Memorial High School in New Jersey. They took me to the gym to sign me up, and we walk in, and there's these square mats on the ground. And I looked at my mom, and I go, where's the ring and the ropes? And my mom said, I told you, not that kind of wrestling. And I was like, well, this is stupid. I don't want to do this. And my mom said, we're here. We're going to sign you up, and we'll see how you like it. And signed me up, and never looked back. And it's been a journey. It's been awesome. Thank God for that flyer, in second grade.
On the line with Damion Hahn, NC champion for Minnesota in 2003 and 2004, four-time All-American, now an assistant wrestling coach at Cornell University. And you mentioned your mom, but when I remember Damion Hahn, I remember the figure of your dad, a larger-than-life figure with the beard and looked like that guy that just had this imposing mentality. Your dad has since passed, but as we remember your dad and what he meant to you, how influential was he in getting you to this point where you are today?
When I talk about, my family, particularly my father, the best thing I can say, he was my role model. He was my superhero. Everything when a kid grows up and, they watch football, basketball, the next Michael Jordan, Barry Sanders, that was my dad. And, he at a very young age, he instilled, certain values that I carry with me to this day. And, integrity is a big part of that. And, when growing up, my family was very involved in every aspect of my life. My dad was my coach, and if it wasn't for him, and I wouldn't be in the position I am today, and I wouldn't be able to, help these young men on a daily basis that I do now. And when I look back, and the greatest thing that I can take away from what my father instilled in me, it was just the value of helping others. And I look at his, what he did as a coach, and all the kids that have come through his program, and it's mind blowing, because growing up, we had an open door. I mean, it was a revolving door for that matter. And I mean, we had kids coming and going left and right. I mean, my house is like, Grand Central Station, and he never closed anybody off. If the kid wanted help, if the kid it needed the work, he was there to provide that for them. And and in today, I mean, you don't see that a lot. When people get to a certain point in their career, they kind of forget where they came from. And that's one of the things, my dad always used to tell me. He goes, don't ever forget. And so the lives that he touched, that what I'm doing now, it's for him. I mean, because I hopefully, I'm making him proud, carrying on his legacy, and, helping these kids, achieve their goals and dreams.
When I think of Damion Hahn, I think of the great high school wrestling career. As I've told you, I had the I'm a Fan of Damion Hahn t-shirt that Screwy Louie Lazari gave me. And did you feed into that? Did you know how good you were and all of the reputation you had in high school about what you were going to do in the sport?
Going through, I had success at a young age, and that's what I think what really kept me excited about it. And then, there was a lot of talk and a lot of build-up when I got into high school. And, I was, 14 years old, 15 years old, and I think any kid at that point in time having the success that I did, they tend to, I don't want to say get cocky, but, think more of themselves. And I remember, I thought, heck, man, I was going to be the next, 4-time national champ, 4-time state champ, 4-time national champ, Olympic champ, world champ. So in my mind, I thought, man, I'm going to do this. I can do this. I'm going to do this. And probably what put some things into perspective for me, coming into high school, I wasn't a 4-time state champ. I lost in the state finals, and that was probably, we joke about it here at Cornell that, nothing good ever comes out of a loss. And I like to argue with Rob about it and say, you can learn from that. And so we go back and forth sometimes. And honestly, I think losing in the state finals as a freshman was the greatest thing that could ever happen to me, because it really put things into perspective and, not take things for granted. Apply yourself in certain areas where you need the work. So for me, I knew somewhat of my potential, but it kind of took on a whole thing of its own in some sense, and I started having even more success, and it was definitely fun, very stressful at times, but, don't ever lose sight of why we do this sport, and that is for, the things that we learn, the discipline, the hard work that goes into this. I mean, and it'll teach you life lessons. So I think, early on I didn't see that, and now looking back, it's like this is what shaped me and what I do. So, it's a loaded question.
We're on the mat with Damion Hahn, 2-time NCAA wrestling champion from Minnesota. We're going to have you on for another segment, but I want to make sure we take the time right now because we just have a couple minutes in this segment. We're asking all of our guests, Mount Rushmore of wrestling, who would be on Damion Hahn's Mount Rushmore of wrestling if you had to choose who would go on that great structure?
Oh, my goodness. Wow. So, let's see. Well, obviously, if you look at the first ever wrestling match that I remember seeing, it was in 1988. I was sitting in my parents' bedroom, and I watched John Smith win his first Olympic gold medal. And I remember turning to my parents, and I said, guys, that's going to be me someday. So, I mean, John has to, be on that, that monument.
Okay.
You have, you look at the history and what a guy like Dan Gable has done, as an athlete, as a coach, is just phenomenal. You look at, in Bruce Baumgartner, these are guys that when I was young, I grew up watching. So you guys have Bruce Baumgartner. And then later on into, as I got older, you start watching guys, and I competed with someone like Cael Sanderson. What he is the first, to win 4 titles undefeated. I think that is something that is a phenomenal feat.
All right. So I've got. So you got your 4 in. So I've got to make sure we stop you there before we go into our first break here. But we're going to be back with more Damion Hahn on the mat. 1650 The Fan.
1650 The Fan. KCNZ.
We are back on the mat. 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. We're on the line with 2-time NCAA champion Damion Hahn won NCAA championships for Minnesota in 2003 and 2004. And the decision to go to Minnesota, historically we look at it, 1999, Iowa beats Minnesota by 2 points at the NCAA tournament, lost at the Big Ten, so Minnesota was right on the cusp, and then Damion Hahn decides to go to the University of Minnesota from New Jersey. What goes into the decision for you to leave the East Coast and come to the Midwest?
Well, when I was being recruited, and I remember getting, my first letter from any college, it's funny, it was the University of Minnesota, and I knew nothing about college wrestling. I never saw a college match before in my entire life. The wrestling at the college level on the East Coast was not as, it wasn't Iowa. It wasn't Oklahoma State. Those are literally the only two schools that I knew. And so I remember getting my first letter was from Minnesota, and I opened it up, and it was, the questionnaire and everything. And I was like, Minnesota? Who's Minnesota? And as the process kept going, and it opened my eyes. I got to see, some of these other programs in the Big Ten, Big 12, in the EIWA. And for me, when it came down to it, a big part of the reason why I chose Minnesota, with Jay Robinson and his staff, Marty Morgan, Mark Schwab, and Joe Russell, was they created a culture that was of success, and it had a family atmosphere. My family was extremely involved in every aspect. I wanted that. And, coming out of high school, I tell people my story, come from Lakewood, New Jersey, not known for wrestling, until, I got to high school and I won a state title. The next state title before that was in the early 1970s by a guy named Doug Parisi, who ended up going to Temple, which is no longer a program. And so my senior year, I think we forfeited 3 or 4 weight classes. And in the stands, there might have been 50 people, our parents, and, some friends. And the one thing that I wanted, I said, I want to go to a program that there's going to be a lot of people, that they care about wrestling. So when I ended up taking my visits and I went to the University of Minnesota, they sold me on it. They sold me on their vision. They sold me on, the possibilities of what could be. They showed me the history of where they were. And, you talked about my father, it was a lot like Jay. Jay was a man of integrity. My parents absolutely loved him, and he was a major part of the decision process for me. So it was like going from one dad to a surrogate dad that was almost identical. And I did what I was told, and I went out there and competed. So it was a good fit for me. Not only just within the team, the community, it just had a very, very close knit family, and that's one of the reasons why I think we were as successful as we were, because everybody did it for one another. If you couldn't do it for yourself, you did it for your brother standing next to you. So that was one of the main reasons why I chose the University of Minnesota.
And you were part of that 2001 team. You were a redshirt freshman. You placed 5th that season, but no Minnesota wrestlers in the finals. You came back, only time in history with 10 All-Americans, won it at Carver Hawkeye Arena. You got over the hump, and you were the guy that bent down and you put the nail in the coffin saying that we finally did this. Was that planned? Was that organic? Is that something you wanted to do to show that, hey, we finally did this? Minnesota broke through.
That'll never go away. It was funny. That tournament is it's an amazing. It is an amazing tournament. I mean, everything under the sun happens. I mean, you have your upsets, you have your Cinderella stories, you have so many great moments. And the night before the tournament started, I don't even remember what I was seeded. I think I was seeded fifth seed or 7th seed, or I'm not even sure. But sitting the night before, this is my first time, and I'm rooming with Leroy Vega And we're sitting there, and I asked Leroy, I go, Leroy, what's the most matches you can have? And he goes, well, if you lose first round, you'll have 8 matches to be an All-American. I'm like, well, I ain't losing first round. Well, sure enough, I lost first round. And, it was a grind coming all the way back. And, we got all 10 guys through to, All-Americans. And we sat down the night before, going into the final day. And, we all 10 guys, all the coaches, all our support staff, and we sat there and Jay talked and the coaches talked and we talked, and it was like, guys, if you take care of yourself this final day, the team will take care of itself and the score won't be a question. And before the match, I think we had three of the guys out there. It was me, Owen Elson, and Garrett Lowney. And as soon as they both got pins, and I was the last one to finish up, and, the clock's ticking away, and Joe Russell was in my corner. And as soon as the match was over, I looked over, and he said, "It's over, we won." And I don't know what came over me, but I got down and, put the nail in the coffin. It was not only a great moment for Minnesota wrestling, but a great moment for Jay and his program, because that's the place that he came from. He came from, he spent years there, and to go back, to Iowa in Carver Hawkeye, and win was so special for everybody involved with Minnesota wrestling.
On the line with Damion Hahn, 2-time NCAA champion for Minnesota. We talked about that 0-1 victory. You guys won it again in 0-2, and then you won individual titles in 0-3 and 0-4. And you mentioned Jay being a father figure to you. An interesting storyline how the career ended for Jay at Minnesota. What were your initial thoughts when he got let go at Minnesota?
I don't know all the details. If you look at the media and social media stuff, I don't know. I haven't spoken to Jay, but it would, kind of a shock. You hear all the rumors and you hear what people are saying, and the newspapers. You're like, wow, this is bad. And when it came out, it was like a punch in the stomach. Like, wow, this is really happening. Because I don't think anybody, it's not real until it actually happens. And I think that's in most aspects of life. So when it came to, and I felt sad. I felt sad for him. And and like I said, I don't know enough about the whole entire situation, but. It was a sad day for Minnesota wrestling, because he put 30 years in, and the University of Minnesota did what they did. I'm sure they had cause, and but someone who touched my life the way he did, you feel for them.
You mentioned Cale Sanderson on your Wrestling Mount Rushmore, but you beat him in high school. You were a sophomore. He was a senior. And then the anticipation, the build-up, it was that we were going to get a chance to see you guys in college, that you may be able to break the streak. You actually wrestled him, I think, at the UNO. You were up 3-2 with just 40 seconds left, and you got to take down 1-4-3. But we never got to see that again.
Yeah.
Do you have regrets that didn't happen and we got deprived of a great rivalry?
No. Looking at it, we had 2 matches. That's it. One in high school and then one in college. And he started separating himself, very early on in his college career. I know there was a lot of hype. I know there was, anticipation of it happening, and it actually could have happened in a couple situations. But I didn't perform. And I didn't get to him. Would that have been an awesome opportunity to see or to have? Yeah, I think anybody, I would have loved it. But shame on me. I wasn't prepared, and maybe I was looking ahead or wasn't focusing on the match at hand, and I didn't get the job done. So it would have been nice, but. hey, he did what he did, and, you know, I have much respect for him and his career.
All right, a lot of Iowa wrestlers stand by this. They say, hey, 2004 NCAA tournament finals against Ryan Fulsis, you don't get that injury and that blood timeout, he's going to come back and beat you. What do you say to those critics?
You know, that's funny because, you know, they can be bitter at times. But, you know, I wrestled Ryan, I think that year, I don't know, maybe half a dozen times through our dual meets, open tournaments, Big Tens, NCAAs. And in our entire time of wrestling, I think, you know, he got one win out of probably a dozen. And, I mean, he was a great competitor. You know, he had an unbelievable national tournament, came back and beat Sean Stender in the semifinals. And, you know, through that match, you know, it was a hard-fought match. I mean, we were going back and forth. And, you know, did the blood timeout take away some momentum? I mean, if that's what you want to hang on to, fine, you can hang on to that. But there was still plenty of time left in the match. And, you know, we had the blood timeout, we come back, and they ended up, you know, securing another takedown and then riding it out. So, you know, I guess it is what it is. I mean, you know, I think we both were out there scrapping hard, and, you know, I was the better man that day.
And we have to go the year before, talk about that great match, because to set it up, Cale Sanderson beats John Trench in the finals, major decision. Everyone talks about that match. The next year, It's supposed to be his year. John Trench is supposed to walk through and do it, and you're down late, and you go for a lateral drop. What goes through your head that you decide to go for it and you won an NCAA tournament?
Well, that was an interesting year all around, because I was out for the first part of the year. I had ACL surgery, and I think it was like the beginning of September, and I was projected to come back, you know, at 184. And I wrestled my first, 2 matches at 184 right after my ACL surgery. I think January 1st was my first duel against Oklahoma State. And I remember, you know, getting my weight down and weighing in and going out there and competing against Russell. And I wrestled great for about 30 seconds. And after that, I had nothing left. And literally, and I lost, I think, 6-1. He's a freshman. I'm a junior. I think I was ranked like first or second in the country. And he beat me. And then after that weekend, you know, I went to my coaches and I sat down and I said, Jay, you know, can we talk? And I want to think about going up to 197. And he had reservations about it. You know, he talked to Marty, and Marty was on, you know, Marty said, Jay, listen, you know, I wrestled him when he's 200 pounds. I wrestled him when he's 85 pounds. He goes, it's night and day. And so they were like, okay, look, we got a trip coming up, finish up the weekend, and then we'll talk about going up to 97. And then I went up to 197 at National Duels. And I ended up taking a loss to Nick Sacchetti, a kid that's from New Jersey. We grew up wrestling one another, and first time I've ever lost to him. But we stayed the course. You know, I finished out the remainder part of the season, heading into the postseason. You know, I ended up winning, you know, Big Tens and going into the national tournament. You know, I was kind of hitting my stride. And Jay, I remember him on a radio, on the radio back in Minnesota, and they were talking about the national tournament. And, you know, they asked for some key guys. And, you know, I remember Jay saying, he said, you know, we're expecting, you know, Damion to be in the finals. And I heard it, and I was like, all right. You know, it was just confirmation for me that, you know, he knew, he believed what I could do. And, you know, I had a couple close matches throughout that tournament. You know, I think in the quarterfinal or the round of 16, I ended up winning, you know, with a last-second takedown. And then in the semifinals, I wrestled a wall. And, again, I was losing with a couple seconds left. I ended up getting to go behind for the takedown to go in the finals.
And
then
I hate to do this to you, but we are out of time. But this gives us reason to have you back on the program and talk more about this. But thank you for joining us and being a part of this. We had Damion Hahn, 2-time NCAA champion, on the line with us. Make sure to check out the book signing on Thursday with Dale Anderson. I'm Kyle Klingman. You've been listening to On the Mat on 1650 The Fan.
You've been listening to On the Mat, a presentation of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, and brought to you by Rolling Ford in Shell Rock on 1650 The Fan, KCNZ.
This show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.